The chains clinked softly as the orc woman stepped onto the auction block, and Garrett Grimshaw felt something in his chest tighten when he saw how carefully she kept her eyes on the horizon, as though the crowd did not exist at all. He had come to the coastal market only for rope and pitch. The slave auction was held in the same square, and he had meant to walk past, but the sudden roar of competing bids stopped him. Garrett turned, curious despite himself, and saw her. She was smaller than he expected an orc to be, perhaps a few inches shorter than his own 6 feet, with a lean, strong build that spoke of years spent working. Her skin was a deep green, her dark hair braided tightly against her skull, and her tusks were small, barely visible when her mouth was closed. She wore a rough linen shift, stained with salt, and iron cuffs on her wrists. The auctioneer, a florid man in a velvet coat, was nearly shouting. 200 gold, do I hear 220? 220, called a man in silk, his rings flashing. 250, countered another, a broad-shouldered merchant with a scar across his jaw. Garrett frowned. 200 gold would buy a ship. Why would anyone pay that for a single slave, orc or otherwise? He edged closer, trying to understand. The orc woman did not flinch as the bids climbed. Her gaze remained fixed on the distant line where the sea met the sky, her expression unreadable. Garrett wondered if she understood what was happening or if she had simply learned not to care. 300, shouted the scarred merchant. 320. The silk-clad man shot back, his voice tight with irritation. A third voice joined, older and cold. 400 gold. The crowd went silent. Garrett turned and saw a man standing apart from the others, tall and silver-haired, dressed in fine black wool. His face was lean and hard, the kind of face that had learned early how to take what it wanted. Garrett recognized him. Osric Halford, the reef baron who controlled most of the pearl diving along the coast. A man who owned more boats than Garrett had ever seen in one harbor, and who was rumored to have drowned a competitor once, though no one could prove it. The auctioneer licked his lips. 400 gold from Master Halford. Do I hear 420? The scarred merchant shook his head and stepped back. The man in silk hesitated, then did the same. Halford smiled, a thin, cold expression. Garrett did not know why he spoke. Perhaps it was the way the orc woman stood so still, as though she had already decided the outcome did not matter. Perhaps it was the look on Halford's face, smug and certain. Perhaps it was simply that Garrett had spent too many years watching men like Halford take everything, and he was tired of it. 450, he said. The crowd turned. Halford's eyes narrowed. The auctioneer blinked, startled. 450 gold. The auctioneer repeated, his voice rising. Do I hear 500? Halford studied Garrett for a long moment. Garrett met his gaze without flinching. He had 460 gold to his name, saved over years of salvage work, diving wrecks and hauling up cargo that others had given up for lost. It was everything he owned, aside from his boat and his tools. 500, Halford said softly. Garrett's jaw tightened. He could not match that. He started to turn away, frustrated with himself for even trying when the orc woman moved. It was the smallest shift, her head turning just enough that she could see him. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black, and in them he saw something he recognized. Not hope exactly, more like a question. He thought of the coins hidden in the false bottom of his sea chest, the emergency fund he had sworn never to touch. 50 gold pieces, set aside in case his boat sank or he broke a leg and could not work. 510, Garrett said. Halford's expression hardened. 600. The crowd murmured. That was madness. No slave was worth 600 gold, not even a trained scribe or a master shipwright. Garrett knew he should stop. He had just over 500 gold in total. If he spent it all, He would have nothing left for food, for repairs, for the 100 small expenses that kept a salvage diver alive. But he looked at the orc woman again, and she was still watching him, and he could not make himself walk away. 610, he said. Halford stepped forward, his face dark with anger. 700. Garrett felt the words stick in his throat. He could not bid higher. He simply did not have the coin. The auctioneer raised his gavel. 700 gold, going once. Wait, the orc woman said. Her voice was low and clear, cutting through the noise of the crowd. Everyone stared. Slaves were not supposed to speak during auctions. The auctioneer scowled. Silence, or you will be whipped. She ignored him, her eyes still on Garrett. You, she said. Why are you bidding? Garrett hesitated. He did not have a good answer. I do not know, he admitted. She studied him for a moment longer, then turned to Halford. You want me because I can read the old maps, she said. It was not a question. Halford's face went carefully blank. The crowd murmured again, confused. You think I will lead you to the pearls, she continued, but I will not. I would rather die. You will do as you are told, Halford said coldly. No, she said, I will not. Halford smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We will see. The orc woman turned back to Garrett. If you win, will you free me? Garrett blinked. What? Will you free me? She repeated. He thought about it. He thought about the fact that he had just tried to spend everything he owned on a woman he did not know, for reasons he could not explain. He thought about the way she looked at the horizon, as though freedom was something she could see if she just looked hard enough. Yes, he said. She nodded once, as though that settled something. Then she turned to the auctioneer. I will tell you where the drowned city is, she said. The one with the pearls, but only if he wins. The crowd erupted. The auctioneer shouted for order. Halford went very still, his eyes locked on the orc woman. You are bluffing, Halford said. No, she said simply. The auctioneer looked between them, clearly out of his depth. Master Halford, do you wish to continue bidding? Halford's jaw worked. He looked at Garrett, then at the orc woman, and Garrett saw the moment he made his decision. 800 gold, Halford said. Garrett's stomach dropped. He could not match that. He opened his mouth, though he did not know what he was going to say when the orc woman spoke again. If he buys me, I will never speak, she said to Halford. You can torture me. You can starve me. It will not matter. I will die silent, and the location of the city will die with me. Halford's face twisted. You think you can threaten me? I am not threatening, she said. I am telling you what will happen. The auctioneer looked nervous now. Perhaps we should. 900 gold, Halford snapped. The orc woman did not even blink. The same answer, she said. Garrett watched the reef baron's hands curl into fists. Halford was a man used to getting what he wanted, and the orc woman was denying him with a calmness that bordered on contempt. Garrett wondered if she understood how dangerous that was, or if she simply did not care. Finally, Halford turned to Garrett. How much can you bid? He asked. Garrett saw no point in lying. 510, he said. Halford laughed, sharp and bitter. Then you cannot win. Maybe not, Garrett said, but she will not help you either way. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Halford turned and walked away, his boots striking the cobblestones hard. The crowd parted for him, silent. The auctioneer cleared his throat. So, 510 gold to the gentleman in the gray coat. Going once, going twice, sold. Garrett felt numb as he counted out the coins. His hands moved automatically, stacking gold pieces on the auctioneer's table while his mind tried to catch up with what he had just done. He had spent everything. Everything. For a woman who claimed to know the location of a drowned city, and who had promised information he had never asked for. The auctioneer handed him a key and a bill of sale. Garrett took them both, then walked to the auction block. The orc woman watched him approach, her expression still calm. Turn around, Garrett said quietly. She obeyed, and he unlocked the cuffs on her wrists. They fell away with a clatter. She rubbed her wrists, which were raw and red, then turned to face him. "Thank you," she said. Garrett pocketed the key. "Can you really read the old maps?" "Yes. And you know where the drowned city is?" "Yes," he nodded slowly. "What is your name, Orla Fenn?" she said. "Garrett Grimshaw," he replied. "I have a boat. It is small and it is old, but it floats. I can take you wherever you want to go." Orla looked at him for a long moment, and he had the sense that she was weighing him, measuring him against some internal standard. Finally, she said, "I want to go home." "Where is home?" "North," she said. "Past the gray cliffs." Garrett knew the cliffs. They marked the edge of human territory, the place where the maps grew vague and unhelpful. "That is a long way," he said. "I know. It will take weeks." "I know," she said again. Garrett sighed. He had no food, no coin, and a passenger who was being hunted by one of the most powerful men on the coast. It was possibly the worst situation he had ever talked himself into. "All right," he said. "Let us go." They walked through the market together, and Garrett felt the eyes on them, the whispers that followed. A human man and an orc woman, walking side by side. It was not illegal, not technically, but it was not common either. Most people looked at orcs and saw monsters, enemies, things to be used or destroyed. Garrett had never thought much about it one way or another. He spent most of his time underwater, where the only thing that mattered was whether you could hold your breath long enough to get the job done. His boat was tied at the far end of the docks, a 30-foot sloop with a patched sail and a name that had worn off years ago. Garrett just called it the boat. It had a small cabin below deck, barely large enough for one person to sleep in, and a hold that smelled of salt and fish. Orla stepped aboard without hesitation, her movements easy and balanced. Garrett noticed that she did not need to grab the rail, even though the boat was rocking. She moved like someone who had spent time on the water. "You know boats," he said. "I grew up on the coast," Orla replied. "Before the war," Garrett nodded. The war had ended 15 years ago, but its scars were still visible. Whole orc villages had been destroyed, their people scattered or enslaved. Garrett had been a child then, too young to fight, but he remembered the stories. The orcs had lost, and the terms of surrender had been brutal. He untied the mooring lines and pushed off from the dock. The wind was fair, blowing from the south, and he raised the sail with practiced efficiency. The boat heeled over slightly, then settled into a steady glide. Orla stood near the bow, watching the shore recede. Garrett steered them out of the harbor, past the other boats, past the lighthouse with its bright flame, past the last of the human world. When they were clear of the headland, he tied off the tiller and went to stand beside her. "You said you could read the old maps," Garrett said. "What did you mean?" Orla glanced at him. "The orc cities were not built like human cities," she said. "Our maps use different symbols, different measurements. Most humans cannot read them, but you can." "Yes. How?" She was quiet for a moment. "My mother was a keeper of records," she said finally. "She taught me. And the drowned city, is that real?" Orla nodded. "It is real. It was called Kethmer. It sank during the war when the sea gates were broken. And there are pearls there." "Yes," Orla said. "The temples were decorated with them, but that is not why I know the location." Garrett waited. "The shrine stone of my people is there," Orla said quietly. "It was too heavy to move when the city flooded. We left it behind." "What is a shrine stone?" "A marker," she said. "A remembrance. It holds the names of our ancestors, carved in stone, going back 1,000 years. She looked at him, and her eyes were fierce. "That is why I will not tell Halford where the city is. He would take the pearls and leave the stone to rot in the dark." Garrett thought about that. He thought about spending 500 gold to save a woman who wanted to recover a piece of carved rock. He thought about how little sense it made and how much it mattered anyway. "We will get it back," he said. Orla blinked. "What? The shrine stone," Garrett said. "We will get it back." "You do not have to, I know," he said, "but I am going to." Orla stared at him, and for the first time since he had seen her on the auction block, her composure cracked. Her eyes grew bright and she looked away quickly, blinking hard. "Thank you," she whispered. Garrett nodded and returned to the tiller, giving her space. The wind held steady and the boat cut through the waves with a soft hissing sound. Gulls wheeled overhead, crying. The sun moved slowly across the sky. After a while, Orla came to sit beside him. "You spent all your money," she said. "Yes." "Why?" Garrett considered the question. He still did not have a good answer. "Halford wanted you," he said finally. That seemed like enough reason to make sure he did not get you. Orla smiled just a little. It was the first time he had seen her smile, and it changed her face, softening the hard edges. "You do not like him." "No one likes him," Garrett said, "but most people are smart enough not to bid against him." "Are you not smart?" "Apparently not," Garrett said dryly. Orla laughed, a low, warm sound. Garrett found himself smiling too. They sailed north for 3 days. Garrett had a fishing line and a net, and he caught enough to keep them fed. Orla proved to be useful in ways he had not expected. She could tie knots he had never seen before, quick and strong. She knew how to read the color of the water, spotting shallows and currents. She did not talk much, but when she did, her words were precise and thoughtful. On the 3rd night, they anchored in a small cove to wait out a storm. Rain drummed on the deck, and the boat rocked uneasily. Garrett sat in the cabin, trying to mend a torn sail by lamplight. Orla sat across from him, sharpening a knife she had found in the hold. "Tell me about the drowned city," Garrett said. Orla looked up. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," he said. "If we are going to dive it, I need to know what we are dealing with." She set down the knife. "Kethmer was built on a delta," she said. 3 rivers met there, and we built channels and locks to control the water. It was beautiful." Her voice grew distant. "The streets were paved with white stone. The temples had towers that caught the light at dawn. My mother used to take me to the market, and I would buy candied fish from a vendor who always gave me extra." "What happened?" "The war," Orla said simply. "The human army could not take the city by force, so they destroyed the sea gates. The ocean came in all at once. Thousands drowned." She paused. "I was 10. My mother got me onto a boat, but she did not come with me. She said someone had to stay and try to save the records." Garrett felt something twist in his chest. "I am sorry," he said. Orla shrugged, but he could see the pain in her eyes. "It was a long time ago. That does not make it easier." "No," she agreed. "It does not." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain. Finally, Garrett said, "How deep is the city?" 60 feet in most places," Orla said. "Deeper in the old quarter." Garrett nodded. 60 feet was manageable, though it would take several dives to reach the shrine stone and bring it up. "And you know where the stone is?" "In the central temple," Orla said, "the one dedicated to the Sea Mother." "Can you draw me a map?" Orla smiled faintly. "I can do better than that. I can guide you there." Garrett frowned. "You are not diving." "Why not?" "Because it is dangerous." "I know how to dive," Orla said. "I have been doing it since I was a child." "That does not mean, Garrett," she said, and her voice was firm. "I am not going to sit in the boat while you risk your life for my people's stone. I am coming with you." Garrett wanted to argue, but the look on her face told him it would be pointless. "Fine," he said. "But you follow my lead. If I say we surface, we surface." "Understood, understood," Orla said. The storm passed by morning, leaving the sky clean and bright. They raised anchor and continued north. The coastline grew wilder, the cliffs steeper. Garrett saw fewer human settlements and more ruins, stone walls overgrown with vines, docks rotted to stumps. On the 5th day, Orla pointed to a headland. "There," she said. Kethmer is just beyond that point. Garrett adjusted their course. As they rounded the headland, he saw the bay, wide and shallow, its water a pale green. He could see shapes beneath the surface, the broken outlines of buildings. "There," Orla said quietly. "That is my home." They anchored in the center of the bay. Garrett prepared his diving gear, simple but effective. A weighted belt to help him sink, a rope tied to the boat so he could find his way back, and a net bag for carrying salvage. He also had a pair of glass goggles, a luxury he had bought years ago, which let him see clearly underwater. Orla watched him work, then began to strip off her outer clothes. Garrett looked away, embarrassed, until she said, "I am ready." He turned back and saw that she was wearing a simple linen shift, tied at the waist. She had a determined look on her face. "Remember," Garrett said, "if your lungs start to burn, surface immediately, do not push it." "I know," Orla said. They went over the side together. The water was cold, shockingly so, and Garrett felt his breath catch. He forced himself to relax, to breathe slowly, letting his body adjust. Beside him, Orla floated easily, her eyes already scanning the water below. Garrett took a deep breath, then dove. The weight belt pulled him down, and he kicked hard, descending through the green water. The ruins rose up to meet him, walls and streets and archways, all covered in waving seaweed. Fish darted through empty windows. A stone statue lay on its side, its face worn smooth by the current. Orla swam beside him, her movements graceful and efficient. She pointed, and Garrett saw the temple, a massive structure with columns still standing. They surfaced together, gasping. "That is it," Orla said, her voice tight with emotion. Garrett nodded. "Let us rest, then we will go down again." They made 3 more dives that day, each time going a little deeper, a little closer to the temple. On the 4th dive, they reached the entrance. The doors had long since rotted away, and they swam through into a vast, shadowy space. Garrett's goggles let him see the carvings on the walls, intricate patterns of waves and fish and strange, beautiful symbols he did not recognize. Orla swam ahead, and Garrett followed. She led him through a series of chambers, past altars and offering pools until they reached the center of the temple. There, set into the floor, was a massive stone slab, 10 feet long and 6 feet wide, covered in carved names, the shrine stone. Orla pressed her hand against it, and even through the water, Garrett could see the tears streaming down her face. He touched her shoulder gently, and she nodded. They surfaced together, exhausted. "It is too heavy," Garrett said once they were back on the boat. "We cannot lift it alone." Orla wiped her face. "I know, we need help. Ropes, pulleys, maybe a second boat." "Where will we get that?" Orla asked. Garrett thought about it. He had no money and no friends who owned equipment like that, but he knew someone who did. "There is a harbor 2 days south," he said. "Port Crail. They have a magistrate and a harbor master. If we can convince them that the shrine stone is a cultural artifact, they might lend us gear." Orla looked skeptical. "Why would they help orcs?" "Because it is the right thing to do," Garrett said. Orla smiled sadly. "Humans do not usually care about the right thing when it comes to my people." Garrett could not argue with that. "Maybe," he said, "but we have to try." They sailed to Port Crail. It was a busy harbor filled with fishing boats and merchant ships. Garrett tied up at the public dock and paid a boy a copper to watch the boat. Then he and Orla walked into town. The magistrate's office was a square stone building near the market. Garrett knocked, and a clerk opened the door. "We need to speak to the magistrate," Garrett said. The clerk looked at Orla, his eyes widening. "We do not serve orcs here." "She is not asking for service," Garrett said evenly. "I am, and I am human." The clerk hesitated, then stepped aside. "Wait here." They waited in a small room with hard wooden benches. After a while, a woman entered. She was middle-aged, with gray streaks in her dark hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. "I am Magistrate Idra Cole," she said. "What is this about?" Garrett explained, keeping his words simple and direct. He told her about the drowned city, about the shrine stone, about Orla's people and their lost history. Idra listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When Garrett finished, Idra turned to Orla. "Is this true?" she asked. "Yes," Orla said. "And you can prove the stone is a cultural artifact?" Orla hesitated. "The carvings will prove it," she said. "They are written in the old tongue. No human could have made them." Idra considered that. "If I lend you the equipment, what do you intend to do with the stone?" "Return it to my people," Orla said. "And the pearls? I assume there are pearls in the city, or Osric Halford would not have been bidding so high." Garrett saw Orla stiffen at Halford's name. "The pearls are still there," Orla said. "We are not interested in them." Idra raised an eyebrow. "You expect me to believe that? Believe what you want," Orla said. "But it is true." Idra studied her for a long moment. Then she turned to Garrett. "Osric Halford has a reputation," she said. "He is powerful and he is ruthless. If he wants the orc woman, he will come looking for her." "I know," Garrett said, "and you are still willing to help her." "Yes." Idra smiled, a small, approving expression. "Then I will lend you the equipment," she said, "on one condition." "What condition?" Garrett asked. "If Halford comes, you let me handle him," Idra said. "I have been waiting for an excuse to bring that man down for years. Do not give him a reason to cry victim." Garrett glanced at Orla, who nodded. "Agreed," Garrett said. Idra stood. "Come with me." She led them to the harbor warehouse, where she spoke to the harbor master, a gruff man with enormous forearms. He grumbled but eventually agreed to lend them ropes, pulleys, and a barge. "You break it, you bought it," he warned. They sailed back to the bay with the barge in tow. It took them 2 days to rig the pulleys and dive down to secure the ropes around the shrine stone. The work was exhausting, and Garrett's lungs burned from the repeated dives. Orla worked beside him, tireless and focused, her hands quick and sure. On the 3rd day they were ready. Garrett climbed onto the barge and began to haul on the ropes. Slowly, inch by inch, the shrine stone rose from the temple floor. Orla dove down to guide it, making sure it did not catch on the columns or walls. Garrett's arms screamed with effort, but he did not stop. He pulled until his hands bled, until the stone broke the surface of the water, dripping and covered in weed. Orla surfaced beside it, gasping and laughing. "We did it," she said. "We did it," Garrett grinned, too exhausted to speak. Together they hauled the stone onto the barge, securing it with more ropes. It was done. They were securing the last of the ropes when Garrett heard the sound of oars. He looked up and saw 3 boats approaching, fast and purposeful. His stomach sank. Halford. The Reef Baron stood in the lead boat, his face cold and angry. Behind him were a dozen men, all armed with clubs and knives. "Step away from the stone," Halford called. Garrett moved to stand between Halford and Orla. "No," he said. Halford's mouth twisted. "I will give you one chance, Grimshaw. Hand over the orc and I will let you live." "No," Garrett said again. Halford gestured and his men began to board the barge. Garrett reached for the knife at his belt, knowing it would not be enough when Orla stepped forward. "Wait," she said. Halford smiled. "Have you changed your mind?" "No," Orla said, "but I want you to know something." "What?" "I already told the magistrate everything," Orla said calmly. "Where the city is, what you wanted, how you plan to force me to guide you. She has it all written down, signed and witnessed." Halford's smile faded. "You are bluffing." "No," Orla said. "I am not." Halford hesitated, and in that moment of doubt Garrett heard another sound, more oars coming fast. He turned and saw a harbor patrol boat flying the magistrate's flag. Idra stood in the bow along with 6 armed guards. "Osric Halford," Idra called. You and your men are under arrest for attempted abduction and interference with a lawful salvage operation. Halford's face went red. You have no authority here. This is territorial waters, Idra said calmly. I have every authority. Surrender your weapons or my men will take them from you. For a moment, Garrett thought Halford might fight, but the Reef Baron looked at the guards at their crossbows and swords and slowly raised his hands. His men did the same. Idra's guards boarded the boats and disarmed Halford's crew. Halford himself was placed in irons, his face twisted with fury. This is not over, he spat at Orla. Yes, Orla said quietly. It is. Idra watched as her men rowed Halford away, then turned to Garrett and Orla. That was well done, she said. Thank you, Garrett said. Idra smiled. Thank me by staying out of trouble. I do not want to have to rescue you again. We will try, Garrett said. Idra laughed and returned to her boat. Garrett and Orla watched her go, then looked at each other. We should get the stone to your people, Garrett said. Orla nodded. Yes. They towed the barge north, past the gray cliffs, into the wild lands. Orla guided them to a small cove where a dozen orc families had settled, building rough shelters from driftwood and stone. When the orcs saw the shrine stone, they came running, their faces bright with shock and joy. An older orc woman, her hair white and her tusks worn smooth, approached the barge. She looked at the stone, then at Orla, and tears streamed down her face. Child, she whispered, you brought it back. I had help, Orla said, glancing at Garrett. The older woman turned to him. Thank you, she said. You have given us back our history. Garrett nodded, unsure what to say. The orcs lifted the stone from the barge with reverence, carrying it up the beach to a flat space where they set it down carefully. They gathered around it, touching the carved names, speaking softly to one another. Orla stood beside Garrett, watching. They are reading the names of their ancestors, she said quietly. Some of them have not seen this stone since they were children. Are you going to stay with them? Garrett asked. Orla looked at him, surprised. Do you want me to? Garrett thought about it. He thought about the past weeks, the way Orla had worked beside him, competent and fearless. He thought about the way she laughed, low and warm. He thought about how empty his boat would feel without her. No, he said honestly, but it is your choice. Orla smiled. I want to stay with you, she said, if you will have me. Garrett felt something warm bloom in his chest. I will have you, he said. They stayed with the orc settlement for 3 days, helping to build a shelter for the shrine stone and sharing meals with Orla's people. The orcs were wary of Garrett at first, but when they saw how Orla looked at him, how she stood close and smiled when he spoke, they began to relax. The older woman, whose name was Marga, even offered Garrett a bowl of stew and told him he was welcome any time. On the morning of the 4th day, Garrett and Orla sailed south. They returned the barge to Port Crail, and Idra informed them that Halford had been tried and found guilty of attempted abduction. His property had been seized, and he was being sent to a labor camp for 5 years. Good, Orla said. Idra smiled. I thought you might feel that way. She handed Garrett a small purse. This is from the sale of some of Halford's confiscated goods. Consider it payment for your trouble. Garrett opened the purse and found 50 gold coins inside. It was not enough to replace what he had spent at the auction, but it was a start. Thank you, he said. Idra nodded. What will you do now? Garrett looked at Orla. I thought we might set up a salvage business, he said. There are plenty of wrecks along the coast. We could make a living. We? Idra asked, glancing at Orla. Yes, Orla said. We. Idra smiled. Then I wish you both luck. They found a small cottage on a cliff overlooking the sea, halfway between Port Crail and the orc settlement. It was old and needed repairs, but it had a good roof and a clear view of the water. Garrett and Orla spent the summer fixing it up, patching walls and replacing shutters. They built a workshop where Garrett could store his diving gear, and a garden where Orla planted vegetables. The salvage business grew slowly but steadily. Garrett's reputation as a diver was solid, and now that he had Orla to help him, he could take on larger jobs. Orla proved to be an excellent navigator, able to read charts and currents with uncanny accuracy. Together, they pulled up cargo from a dozen wrecks, selling what they found and saving the rest. In the evenings, they sat on the cliff and watched the sunset. Orla would tell Garrett stories about Kethmer, about her childhood, about the mother she had lost. Garrett would listen, and sometimes he would tell her about his own past, about growing up in a fishing village, about the first time he had dove and discovered he could hold his breath longer than anyone else. One evening, as the sky turned orange and gold, Orla said, "I never thanked you properly." Garrett looked at her. "For what?" "For buying me," she said, "for freeing me, for helping me get the shrine stone." "You do not need to thank me," Garrett said. "I know," Orla said, "but I want to." She leaned over and kissed him, soft and tentative. Garrett froze for a moment, surprised, then kissed her back. Her lips were warm and she tasted like the sea when they pulled apart. Orla was smiling. "I have wanted to do that for a while," she said. "Me too," Garrett admitted. They sat together in the fading light, Orla's head on Garrett's shoulder, and watched the stars come out. Garrett felt a peace he had not known in years, a sense that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Autumn came, and with it colder winds. Garrett and Orla stocked the cottage with firewood and dried fish, preparing for winter. They continued to dive when the weather allowed, but more often they stayed inside, working on small repairs and planning for the spring. One night, as they sat by the fire, Orla said, "I have been thinking." "About what?" Garrett asked. "About us," she said. "About what we are." Garrett set down the net he was mending. "What do you mean, we live together?" Orla said. "We work together, we share everything, but we have never spoken about what that means." Garrett thought about it. Among humans, what they had would be called a common-law marriage, a partnership recognized by habit and cohabitation. But he did not know if orcs had similar customs. "What do you want it to mean?" he asked. Orla looked at him, her dark eyes serious. "I want to be bound to you," she said. "Formally, the way my people do it." "How do your people do it?" "We make a vow," Orla said, "before witnesses. We promise to stand together, to work together, to protect each other. It is called a life bond." "And you want to do that?" Garrett asked. "With me?" "Yes," Orla said. "If you wanted to." Garrett reached out and took her hand. Her skin was warm, her grip strong. "I want it," he said. Orla smiled, bright and beautiful, and kissed him again. They traveled north to the orc settlement to make their vows. Marga and the other orcs greeted them warmly, and when Orla explained what they wanted, Marga clapped her hands together in delight. "A life bond," she said. "We have not had one of those in years." The ceremony was held on the beach at sunset. The orcs gathered in a circle, and Garrett and Orla stood in the center, holding hands. Marga spoke the old words, asking the Sea Mother to witness their vow. Then Orla turned to Garrett. "I vow to stand with you," she said. "In storm and calm, in wealth and want, until the sea takes us both." Garrett repeated the words, his voice steady. "I vow to stand with you, in storm and calm, in wealth and want, until the sea takes us both." Marga smiled. "Then you are bound," she said. "Let no one break what the sea has joined." The orcs cheered, and someone began to play a drum. There was music and dancing, and Garrett found himself pulled into the celebration, laughing as orcs he barely knew clapped him on the back and offered him cups of strong, bitter ale. Orla danced too, her movements graceful and joyful. Garrett watched her, and his heart felt full. They stayed at the settlement for a week, then sailed back to their cottage. Winter settled in, bringing snow and ice. Garrett and Orla stayed close to the fire, telling stories and making plans. They talked about expanding the salvage business, about buying a second boat, about the possibility of training other divers. In the spring, they dove again, pulling up a cargo of silver candlesticks from a merchant wreck. They sold the candlesticks in Port Crail for a good price, and Garrett used the money to buy Orla a proper diving suit, one that would keep her warm in the cold water. One evening, as they sat on the cliff watching the waves, Orla said, "I am pregnant." Garrett turned to her, his eyes wide. "What?" "I am pregnant," she repeated, smiling. "I felt the quickening this morning." Garrett felt a rush of emotions, joy, fear, wonder. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Orla said. "I am sure." Garrett pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice full of awe. "Yes," Orla said, laughing. "We are." They prepared for the baby through the summer. Garrett built a cradle from driftwood, sanding it smooth so there were no splinters. Orla sewed blankets and tiny clothes, her hands quick and sure. They spoke to Marga, who gave them advice and promised to come when the baby was born. In the autumn, Orla went into labor. Garrett sent for Marga, and the older orc woman arrived within hours, bringing herbs and clean cloths. The labor was long and difficult, and Garrett paced outside the cottage, his heart in his throat, until he heard the baby's first cry. Marga opened the door, smiling. "You have a daughter," she said. Garrett went inside and found Orla lying on the bed, exhausted but smiling. In her arms was a tiny baby, her skin a soft, pale green, her eyes tightly closed. She had small tusks, barely visible, and a tuft of dark hair. "She is beautiful," Garrett whispered. "Yes," Orla said. "She is." They named her Gala after Orla's mother. Gala grew quickly, strong and healthy. She had Orla's dark eyes and Garrett's stubborn chin, and she laughed easily, a bright, joyful sound that filled the cottage. Garrett and Orla continued their salvage work, taking turns watching Gala. When she was old enough, they took her out on the boat, and she stared at the water with wide, fascinated eyes. One day, when Gala was 3, she pointed at the sea and said, "Dive." Garrett laughed. "Not yet, little one. You are too small." "Big soon," Gala said confidently. Orla smiled. "She is your daughter," she said to Garrett. "Stubborn as a barnacle," Garrett grinned, "and yours, fearless as the tide." They raised Gala with love and laughter, teaching her about the sea, about diving, about the history of her people. They told her about the shrine stone, about Kethmer, about the vow they had made on the beach. Years passed. Gala grew into a strong, confident girl, comfortable on the water and on the land. Garrett's hair began to gray, and Orla's tusks grew longer, but their bond remained as strong as ever. One evening, as they sat on the cliff with Gala between them watching the sunset, Garrett said, "Do you ever regret it?" Orla looked at him. "Regret what?" "This," Garrett said, gesturing to the cottage, the sea, their daughter. "This life." Orla smiled. "Never," she said. "This is exactly where I want to be." Garrett nodded, satisfied. He looked out at the water, at the place where the sky met the sea, and felt a deep, abiding peace. Gala tugged on his sleeve. "Papa, tell me the story again." "Which story?" Garrett asked. "The one about the auction," Gala said. "About how you saved Mama." Garrett glanced at Orla, who smiled and nodded. "All right," he said. "It started on a day when I went to the market for rope and pitch, and I heard a sound that changed everything." He told the story, and Gala listened with shining eyes, and Orla leaned against his shoulder, warm and solid and real. The sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and the waves crashed below, eternal and unchanging. And Garrett knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that he was the luckiest man alive.